Yeah, it's interesting too. The On a larger scale, the ideas, at least in A Few Good Men. I watched this movie a while ago. I'm not gonna lie, but Tom Cruise's viewpoint on it, of he he's proving legal wrongdoing, so I don't think his viewpoint necessarily is important. But the general is saying, you want the truth, you can't handle the truth, you have to make sacrifices, you have to make these difficult decisions, so on and so forth. His idea of this like cutthroat, ruthless, win at all costs thing is depicted as being an old person system of thought,
Yes.
when in reality, for let's say 90% of human history, that was the domain of the young completely. Again, I'll go back to World War I. World War I was when we started having this idea that war is when old people send young people to die.
Yeah.
And it was true. I'm not going to say that it's not true. In that case, it was. But again, for most of human history, this idea of ruthless conflict, unconstrained by boundaries, unconstrained by rules, just like feverish total war, was the domain completely of young men.
Hmm.
And that the reining in happened from the old. So A Few Good Men and similar, let's just say on similar works on war, really showed the flip there, of the old people essentially being the ruthless, boundary pushing types that are more invested in their own like glory and success and their goal seeking, while the young have to rein them into the rules based order. And that's everything everywhere isn't the same because it's not military based, but it's basically the same thing of you have to follow the rules, you have to you know
Now,
live a certain way.
if you take this concept of who to listen to back to, like, let's say Shakespeare, where most people, I think, growing up in my age, looked at a play like Romeo and Juliet and didn't get that the message of the play was that you should probably listen to your parents on who to hang out with, because things can go very wrong, very badly. Um, and it was like contrasting this to, like, and it seems to be pretty prolific these days, that you're supposed to listen to the young, like the wisdom of the old ages should be rejected, and that there is a new enlightened way of thinking of things.
Yeah, it's funny because again, the young today have been essentially propagandized into having the geriatric ideas of 5,000 years ago. Like the young today they want, generally, and I'm pretty young, but they want more rules, more restrictions, more narrow, conceptions of what is right and what should be done. Everything has to be hemmed in and HRified until it's nothing. Meanwhile, that was what youth was opposed to for all of human history.
Right.
Even you look at like I wrote about the punk scene recently, and there the original punk scene was a lot of young people who didn't want to listen to anybody, who would go and get into these brawls and go to these insane concerts and do a ton of drugs and alter their bodies. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's an expression of that youthful
It
emphasis
was the
on freedom.
fringe, and it was
Yeah.
explicitly on purpose the fringe, away from the center and the archetypes.
Yes, and the older, let's say, music industry types didn't get it. They were, you need to calm down, you need to do things correctly, so on. Now, the old punks, so to speak, are like not socially, let's say, worked into the fray of the new era, because the new ones are just like during 2020 they're talking about how we need to like lock everything down. It's like,
Oh
really, you're
yeah,
punk, you're
when you had
punk.
Rage Against the Machine, that's my era. You
Oh my god.
coming out saying you really need to go get your vaccination shot and listen to the government. I was like, this shit has got it fucked up.
Yeah, Rage Against the Machine and like Anti-Flag telling you to follow local government mandates is just, it's just peak absurdity, and it's representative of a larger trend, sadly.
And I will tell you, like, I don't mind the idea that you should list, like, that young people should listen to authority. I just happen to have a problem with who's the authority these days, and I think that they think dumb things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on the youth and age elements, I mean, I'm largely, I will say this in particular is not like my original strain of ideas. If you're familiar with Bronze Age mindset,
Oh yeah,
that touches on it well. So,
yeah. It's funny.
I'm
BAP. That's BAP, right? Bronze Age
yeah,
pervert, Bronze Age mindset.
yeah,
This is two podcasts in a row where he's come up, but go on.
yeah. Just I just want to clarify that I'm not not claiming this is my original concept of it, but the the thing was that in the past, at least, let's say go to ancient Greece, the youth, basically everybody under the age of like 36, which is where they thought, oh, you might maybe be an adult now. But the younger generation, so to speak, was always out of control, was always too wild, always needed to be reined in.
Mhm.
And now, if anything, it's the younger generation looking at the older generation and saying, no, you need to be reined in. You're too out of control. You're too wild. We have somehow trended away from needing that older check, that older, the wisdom as a check on the, let's say, fire of the youth. And somehow we've managed to produce a youth through propaganda and media and culture that is terrified of that youthfulness in every way.
So you think it's propag? So you think it's? How do you think that they are propagandized too? Like, how does this? How does it work?
Well, it's a long trend for one, and the biggest push, while there's a lot of individual, let's say, just base level political propaganda about, you should like this policy and not like this other policy and like this system of thought, there's a very large trend away from, let's say, vitality and vital, uncaring sort of philosophy. Because it's not even a philosophy, it's just living without asking permission all the time. And we've managed to harangue people into being scared of that. One of the ways, I mean, I talk about fighting. Now you can't fight in school as a kid now
I was
at
talking to my
all.
wife about this the other day. Yeah, I mean, I that was true in the '90s also, right? Like my buddies and I. Shout out to Ed, who I still speak with. I'll make sure to let him know that he was talked about here. But Ed actually went out and became a Marine. He and I used to play schoolyard ninjas, where we weren't fighting, but we were pretending like we were fighting. We were, whatever, 10 years old, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. And, the teachers would come down on us like, oh, you can't do that. You're out of control. And it's like, we're not hurting each other. We're just fucking around.
Yeah, absolutely. And even like there's that element of even like something that might have the appearance of having a little bit of edginess to it, or even just a fist fight between two like fifth graders that got mad at each other for whatever reason. You can't do it. You get suspended for 5 days or so, both people. And as a result, this particularly interests me with self-defense, because if some kid's getting bullied or whatever, and they punch the guy in the face, now they're both out of school for five
Oh,
days
that's ridiculous.
It's absurd. And the thing is that it creates this culture of learned helplessness, of
Yeah.
you can't defend yourself. You have to go find a person of authority to defend you for you. And how is that person of authority going to defend you? Oh, well, they're going to send that kid to the principal's office, where they're going to get a mark on their report card. Everything just trends towards being more bureaucratic and more HRified
Ugh.
everywhere, all the way down to childhood. And it's nuts. That's just one small subset, but it's an example that I like to use, because I was just reading about Richard Harding Davis. If you're familiar, he was a journalist around the turn of the
No.
century. Well, he was the foremost American war correspondent for probably about 5 different wars. He rode with Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. All of that. He was really out there doing all of this stuff.
Some badass shit.
Absolutely. And he talks about after his death, his brother published a bunch of his letters, and he talks about his days in school. And he's talking about like getting in fights and arguing with people and socializing with actors and all of this stuff while he's like 17 in college. And it's just the idea of doing any one of the things, any one of the 35 different instances that he mentions in his school days would have completely disqualified him probably from college and definitely from the entire field of journalism today. And he was the greatest journalist of his era. Like,
oh my god, this is and by the way, one thing that popped in my head that I want to mention to the audience is that the reason why he mentions socializing with actors is because actors were the equivalents of prostitutes back then. Keep that in mind, Hollywood.